Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Miyaduge mi forum ki International Organization of Securities Commission sun bainal aqwami fembarige faahkura munda World Investor Week ga bavrum ge gotun Capital Market Development Authority eken October 7 October kuriya genda harakat ge tereng Giyasuddin International School ge dariwaruna financial literacy abehe gotun maalumat koledinuma bebe forum me mi gotun faitvi ahartawge terega Giyasuddin International School CMD en kuriya genda mi fada harakataka debba fawa ebbarulum faako shukura dakuran adi ahme ehme huriha dariwaruna mi forum marhaba dannawa miyadge program mi forum ga maalumat kolti kudina hissa kollani CMD ge faratunna Bank of Maldives Islamic ge faratun mi furatama session kuriya gengos tebani CMDA ge Education and Training Department ge head Alfadil Abdul Zakaria devana session kuriya gengos tebani Bank of Maldives Islamic ge faratun Alfadil Hasan Kalam debe furnaves adi huriya daribarunavas baraboda marhaba dannawan dem miha hisabun session kuriya gengos devuma Alfadil Abdul Zakaria hawal kollana shukriya.
Thank you, Ant. We will just go straight to the presentation and begin. Let's see. I hope everybody can hear me clearly. Right? So it will be good to know if it is okay. Is everybody able to hear me? Somebody confirm if they can hear. And
yes, they can hear.
Okay, let's go on. Right. This presentation is on saving and investing. Right? The views expressed here in the views of the facilitator, not that of CMDA. So that's the disclaimer. Right? So whatever I'm saying is on my behalf rather than representing CMDA. Right? And welcome and a very good morning to everybody. And assalamu alaikum. The contents for today's session, we have financial sector. We'll talk a little bit about what's financial sector, right? Capital Market Development Authority, what we do, and then we'll go on to discuss a little bit about needs and wants, followed by Consumer Price Index, why we need to save money and invest, and then importance of financial planning, budgeting, investing opportunities, and we'll see if you have any questions. Right? If you don't, then probably I will have to ask them. Right? Okay. Financial sector consists of banks, insurance companies, non-banking financial institutions, capital market intermediaries, stock exchange, and other services. Right? Generally, we divide financial sector into two. Right? Those that come under the purview of that of central bank and that of the securities market regulator. Right? Under the purview of the securities market regulator, we have listed companies and so on. And under the purview of central bank, we have all kinds of banks, insurance companies, and non-banking financial institutions. Right? So the stock exchange and other market intermediaries of capital market, of course, will come under Capital Market Development Authority in the Maldives. Right? In other countries, it will be Securities and Exchange Commission or equivalent of that. Right? Some countries have capital market authorities, and other countries might have Securities and Exchange Commissions. All right, some word of wisdom to begin with. Right? When we say normally investment, we have, we see money and think about money, but there are other meanings of investment. And so we begin with a quotation by Benjamin Franklin, right? An investment in knowledge pays the best interest. Right? As students, you could always remember that the investment in knowledge is something that is worthy. Right? I often do this in my maths classes and sometimes statistics classes to tell them that, if you actually get a scholarship, they don't give you $1 million to you, but or 1 million rupiah to you. But then when you value, right, a scholarship to a developed country for a 3-year, 4-year period, include everything, it comes to about 2 million Dividend rupiah. Right? So the value of your knowledge, right, the uh, investment in your knowledge that gives you all A stars, right? In my time, there were no A stars. We only had A's, right? So that is the price, right? Even though you are not given, a token or cash, right? That's how much you are saving, right? Even if you're rich, that's something, right? So Benjamin Franklin is one of the founding fathers of United States, right? If you look at USD 100 bills, you will see Benjamin Franklin on 100 on those bills, right? The other person we have here is Warren Buffett, probably one of these people who would have a lot of these $100 bills, right? Do not save what is left after spending, but spend what is left after saving. This is really a critical. There are lots of quotations by Warren Buffett, very deep. And then if you think about it, you can actually make a difference in your life in terms of financial security and so on. So our paradigm or the way of thinking needs to be changed according to this. What we're saying, he's saying here is you got to actually plan your saving, decide how much you are going to save based on what based on your plans for future, right? Next 5 years, 10 years, and we have to actually focus. We have to actually focus more on what we need to do in future rather than immediate instant gratification. So this should be something as students you should think about. It is very hard to earn money and it's very easy to spend money. Right? Once you start working, you will realize and hope this is just food for thought. Okay, Capital Market Development Authority, where myself, here Asma and Ant is working right now. It's established in 2006. It's the regulator of securities market. So when we say we regulate Maldives Stock Exchange, Securities Depository, and we are also supervisor of Maldives Retirement Pension Scheme. So when we say regulator of securities market, it's not just stock exchange and securities depository. It also includes all the listed companies, or any company that have listed a security or issued any financial instrument through capital market. Right? We also supervise Maldives Retirement Pension Scheme. Right? So we might know Maldives Pension Administration Office. So, everybody who works will contribute there, right? 7% of their salary. Okay. Right. Need versus wants. Right. So you can look at definitions of this. Right. Need. Right. The common definition that is used is requires something because it is essential or very important rather than desirable. So we generally consider for shelter, clothing, and so on. But as time goes, I think things change. And if we think about wants, on the other hand, is to have a desire to possess or do something which you want, right? You would sort of dream of luxury cars, world tours, latest phones, right? iPhone 12, which is expected to be released in 9 days. And what is on the right is really, without the Wi-Fi, is really the well-known Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So this is one of the famous theories that has been there in management, where we talk about people's needs, right? So we say physiological needs, safety needs. So people would want air, shelter, water, basic needs to be satisfied. Then they want security, right? Job security and safety and so on. Once they have that, then they would need, friends, family, and there's lots of argument about, whether people actually complete one and then go to the other, and self-actualization, what happens and so on, right? Also, there are critics who say like, okay, where is any religious dimension, or where is altruism? Like people who might not have met certain needs, but they are ready to donate a kidney, right? Have they reached self-actualization? Now, people who are very rich and have everything they want virtually, are they the ones who donate these things? So there are arguments, and one of the modern arguments, right, even if it looks like joke, is, below that we have Wi-Fi. So someone has actually modified it, right, and put Wi-Fi below it, and I think even though it has some level of humor, people largely believe that internet has become sort of a basic need, right, in order for us to carry about day-to-day business, right, about what we do normally, right. This picture is from an unknown author, and this is copyrighted by Creative Commons, which allows you to really freely use without prior consent because of the fact that the author is unknown. Okay, right. That's another thing in education we got to think about. Right, we're using other people's things. We got to acknowledge those. Right? Okay, let's move on. Right. Say this time we want you to, at least one or two of you to respond to this. Snack and drinks for school interval. Need, want. What do we see? Anybody? Can we have somebody say something? Yes, from students. Is this need or want?
Need.
Need. It's clear, is it? Okay. Anybody disagree? Okay, let's go this one. This is now arguable, right? Very rightly, it is arguable. So as time changes certain things, there are certain things that we cannot potentially live without. We say, even though we say Wi-Fi, we were really focusing on a network connection, right? Maybe of fiber, or like, an internet connection in present day and time. And with COVID, it has made even more important because we are dependent so much on these things, right? The connectivity, right? So as you go along, there are potential areas where we can actually argue for one way or the other. Right? So this has become sort of a need more than a want. This one, what's this one? Anybody? Yeah, you can just on your mic and then answer. What is it?
A want.
I mean, what is this like? I want the what brand and what phone it is. That's iPhone
It's an
11
iPhone.
Pro Max. And there has been some sort of leakage about how iPhone 12 looks like, but we're not quite sure because officially Apple hasn't published any information on it, right? And it will wait until the release date, which is expected to be 13th October, 9 days from now. I once asked this question, right, few years ago, 2 years ago or so, right, about 2 years ago, about iPhone X, right? It was the time of release of iPhone X, XS, and XS Max. And one of the students from Gyasuddin school actually said to me, like, iPhone X is a need, XS Max is a want, right? They might have a point, like if, the functionality is so much and they're going to use it, right? The fact is sometimes a lot of functions that are there are not actually used. So we have to beg the question: is it a need, want, or do we have better use of that money, or it must be done so that other things can take a backstage. So we got to think about those things. In financial planning, we have to really consider these sorts of things and imagine how much you are spending and whether it is really worth and is in line with your plans, right? In order to secure your better future financially. See, those of us who want to instantly gratify this and buy things on impulse would not want to be in a situation where we don't have enough funds to do or deal with when an emergency comes. So we have to have that financial independence, right? If we don't have financial independence, eventually what happens is what is happening all the times in this country, right? When election comes, we know what happens, right? So we don't want that to happen. So we have to be financially independent. Okay. Why do we need to invest? So rather than just passively keeping your savings, whatever you save, there has to be an active approach to invest, because as you can see, right, what this shows is consumer price index for Maldives from 2013 to 2019, assuming prices in mid 2012 is 100 as an index, right? Somebody want to jump in and explain what it is showing really? What is happening to the prices when you go along this graph? What do we see? Yeah, anybody for a question? Okay, we can just go ahead maybe, right? We will still have time for you to ask answer questions as well. So what this is showing is, if something costed 100 rupiah in 2012, now it costs around 112 rupiah, and it may be even more. We don't have final data for 2020 because we are still in 2020, right? But that means if somebody is really working, like in this case, your parents and guardians who are working, you should have received 12% more in income in order to sustain the same level of living, right? We also know between 2013 and 2019, there has been release of several gadgets, household items, other gadgets that we want to use. So it is not just really, in that sense, very reflective. So real cost of living might be even higher, because when we have a consumer price index, we don't put in luxury items and so on, right? So this is mostly focused on what everybody will be consuming. So if these things go up this way, then you can imagine how it will look like with all the gadgets included, right? So there has to be a mechanism to support income, right? Learn a different skill, right? Several soft skills, and become more employable. In future, those who get employed, right, will require much more skills, right? Cross-domain skills in order to have higher chance of being employed. Even now, like those who have several skills, right, and potentially different sort of qualifications from two different domains and so on, will help, right? Now we see a lot of medical doctors coming and doing MBS, right? Master of Business Administration. And the other way around also, right? People wanting to learn some basics about certain areas that they are not, which is not their main field, right? So that they can actually work in organizations and contribute and make sense out of other people's perspectives, what they're talking about even, right? So financial planning, we're talking about long-term profit planning aimed at generating greater return on assets, growth in market share, and at solving foreseeable problems. This is according to Business Dictionary. Right? So that's the definition. We have some key phrases: generating greater return on assets. If you just keep without generating any return for an asset, including money, then it wouldn't buy you the same in future, right? Last year we bought apples for 5 rupiah, and now we see sometimes for 7 rupiah. That's a 20% increase. So two out of 5 is really 40%, not 20. Oh, wow, 40% increase. That's a lot, right? So we have to get returns to compensate for those sorts of price hikes. Right? We have to think about our short-term goals, what we want to achieve within the next 12 months, medium term, 1 to 3 years, and then more than 3 years is generally considered long-term. Some textbooks and other things might focus on at least 5 years and might even say short-term is 1 to 2 years, 3 to 4 years is medium, and then so on. Right? So those differences. Generally, in accounting and finance, we say current is the short term, and current period is usually considered 12 months. Okay. So we got to think about what we want to achieve within next 12 months, next 36 months, right? Beyond 36 months. So these things will depend on, let's say, if with Corona, everybody is stuck. So people want to escape and go somewhere and have some fresh air. So it could be within this period. So 1 to 3, medium term, you're in grade 9 and you will be in grade 12 by the end of that. So what are your plans for those, right? Beyond that, beyond that, what are your plans, right? Owning house and, owning a car or motorbike, whatever, right? Higher education. What are your plans for future? Those are the things to think about. Before saving, we will have to think about what are our goals in life, right? Determine in advance what our income expenses are going to be. Now it may not be like, okay, I don't have income, my parents spend on me or guardians spend on me, so I don't know. But these are things you got to consciously think about, right? Right now, if you're thinking, you got to see, whether your parents are doing what they're supposed to in terms of financial planning, right? Plan your expenses within your means is really important, because sometimes we get carried away and we want what others say, right? So there has to be self-restraint, right? In everything we do, right, in life, really the outcome depends on discipline, right? Whether it is finance or whatever, right? We say as a country, we must have fiscal discipline, right? Meaning that when it comes to spending, we have to have good plans and focus on developmental goals and make sure the money is well spent and not wasted, right? Take measures to increase income and reduce expenses. This has become a necessity, because the general trend is over time prices only go up, right? Over the long term, prices only go up, and you can ask your parents when they were in school how much it cost them to buy some food or whatever the item during that time, and compare it with now, and you'll be surprised. Okay. Right. In this process, we should also make sure we budget, right? List down all sources of income, potential expenses, and then identify which ones are recurring and you have no control over, which ones you can play around and minimize, right? At the same time, thinking about sources of income, where what can I do after work, or even if you're in school, there are little things people could do. I read from a newspaper that there was a student, a kid, who actually sold some plants, right? Potted plants, and then bought himself a bicycle, right? So if you read through history of certain people who have successful businesses now across globe, like IKEA, even at very young age, right? the founder was able to buy little things from a shop and then sell it, right? Matchsticks, and he went on to various different businesses, right? He was selling stationeries where he worked, so he was selling stationeries to his employer and making more money than his salary, right? And he was replicating his competitor. It wasn't his original business to be in furniture. His closest competitor was successful in furniture and selling, and then he did it much better, right? He was saying one day, or he wasn't sure whether it is day or night. He was saying like, okay, you see these huge trucks and then full of furniture, and so like there's so much waste of space, and that got them the idea of having the flat pack, right? And it saves so much space and brings in efficiency. So that is how things are changed, right? Today, it will be very unusual for people not to have a flat pack for furniture, bedrooms, and so on. But the first one to do it gained huge advantage, right? He also did depend a lot on technology, right? Doing things using machinery and perfecting it, right? Thinking about how to make it simple, and people can put together their own furniture, right? It is simple enough, light, right? Okay, so let's move on. So think about budgeting where you can make money and then where you can reduce expenses. This is a sample saving plan. Let's say you want to, right, go and see Taj Mahal. It may not be, it's just a classical example, but you may have different things in your bucket list generally, right? So you just consider, how much money is needed for one person in terms of ticket, and then, pocket money for a few days there to spend, right? So you can plan for eight months, and then if you save about 21 rupiah, right? This is from 2018, so now it may be about 23, 24 rupiah a day. Right? For 8 months, you will have sufficient for one person. So if it's family, you're looking at maybe 60 rupiah or so. Right? Then Xbox One X, right? This is now probably old, right? A few years ago, this was the thing. Cost about 7,300, and if you plan for 2 years, it is 10 rupiah per day. Right? So if you want 1 year, it will be about 20 rupiah. Right? Less than that, you can just work on it. So it's based on the cost and then dividing it by number of days and so on. Okay, if you want to go to Cambridge University, apart from having all A-level A's, at least 3 A's in one sitting, right? It will still cost, if it is not scholarship, it will still cost approximately this amount, right? 79,000 US dollars, almost 80,000 USD, right? 80,000 USD is a lot of money, right? This is just tuition fee. Other things, we're talking about 1.2 million, right? Small business, contribution from family, friends, all of those things, excellent results will give you this, right? When you can compete with other people from across globe, and then do well in the entrance test, right? Then you are there, and the prize money, if you like, in rupiah is about 1.2 million. In Maldivian Indian sort of terms, we are talking about 12 lakh, right? 12 lakh, that's a lot of money. Okay, financial markets, we broadly divide them into two: capital market and money market. So what we are engaged in is actually capital market. Right? The part of the financial system concerned with raising capital by dealing in shares, bonds, and sukuk, and other long-term investments. Right? Money markets is where you sell highly liquid, short-term maturity, certificate of deposits, notes, right? Okay. In capital market, in our market, we have generally three products: shares, bonds, and sukuk. Right? Shares give holders part ownership. Right? Shareholders. So if you have a share in a business, you are a part owner. Right? And often receives dividends. It's not something guaranteed. Right? If a company is profitable, then they can have dividends. Right? Apportion some profit and take it. Right? But if they make losses, and of course, dividends are only to be given out of accumulated profits, and if they consistently make loss, then they wouldn't be able to pay themselves a dividend. Right? And potential to make capital gains. So if you own shares of a publicly listed company and you bought it at some price, and if you can sell it for higher price, then you can make money. Right? Can sell it for a higher price generally if the company is performing well, have good governance systems, and expect it to be to do well for a foreseeable future, right? For next 5 years, 10 years, right? Robust enough, they have good market that is not going to go away. Right? Bonds, on the other hand, are loans from investors to companies or government. Sometimes people give loans to government. Right? It has fixed percentage of return or and investment at the end of the tenure. So if you buy a bond from a corporation, for instance, 1,000 of your bond, 7%, then you will get 7% for that number of years. It's a 5-year bond, then you get 7% every year, and then at the end of 5 years, you also will get back your initial investment. Right? Then bondholders are not owners of the company. Since you are a lender, you don't become an owner. Right? Similarly, loosely, we call a sukuk as Islamic bond because it is also a debt instrument where you get a certificate for lending, and you will receive a share of profit on a pre-agreed basis usually. Right? Sukuk money is also returned at the end of the tenure, unlike shares money, right, where you have to actually sell to get the money. Right? So that is why it is more closely related to bonds than shares. Right? And by the way, sukuk is just a generic name for that kind of instrument, and the contracts will vary. And there are about 14 different types of contracts possible, and it could be more with innovation. Okay, investing in bond, as we said, fixed income, moderate level of risk, moderate level of return. Right? So generally, the higher the risk, right, the higher the potential return. And you can see is a tradable, very liquid instrument. It looks like dollar, right? Like, where you can actually easily buy and sell. In many developed markets, you can, buy now, and then next few minutes you want to sell, you can still sell, right? So it is that easy to buy and sell. So they are equivalent to cash in that sense for a liquid market. If it is not liquid, it is not so, right? Investing in shares, you have high risk, high return. So this is where you have to determine whether you are to take that risk or not. When you're investing, you have to actually invest in a combination of shares and bonds and other instruments, have some savings in your bank account, right? Have insurance and so on. So that it is diversified enough, and then it provides you what is called financial security. And sometimes these things are also referred to as securities for that reason, because it provides you security, right? Financial. These are the listed companies in the Maldives, and you can, if you buy shares or bonds or sukuk from any of those, when they issue, or in the secondary market, then if you buy shares, you become a part owner, and if you buy bonds or sukuk, then you become a lender, right? So currently we have these companies: MTCC, STO, Bank of Maldives, Dirag, MTDC, Amanat Kafil Maldives, Maldives Islamic Bank, Ooredoo, Centurion, and HDFC.
Companies are built to grow. They work to sell more products, expand their operations, and increase their earnings quarter by quarter and year by year. When you buy a stock, you buy a small piece of a company. You become a partial owner, a shareholder. Your stocks can make money for you in two ways. First, when the price of your shares goes up. And second, if the company pays out dividends. Let's take a closer look. The most basic sign of growth is a company's ability to earn profits, what the market calls earnings. As the earnings of a company grow, so typically does the price of its stock, making your shares more valuable when you sell them. Now, about the other way you can make money, those dividends. When companies are profitable, they can use their earnings to expand the business. They can also pay dividends to their shareholders as a way of sharing some of the earnings. The dividend yield is the dividend divided by the stock price. It tells you how much the company pays in dividends for every $1 of stock.
Right, you probably noticed that there are two ways of making money. The first they say is dividend, capital gain, and not dividend. In our culture, usually we talk a lot about dividend, right? People buy stock or shares for the purpose of getting dividend, right? Dividend is the distribution of profit, but those who actually make money out of these things is or become rich out of buying, buying shares is the ones who on the look and see like, okay, how is the stock market moving? Can I buy low and sell high and then continue the process and make money? Normally, when you sell on a daily basis, your daily return or monthly return may not look great, but if you're getting small amounts, but you're doing it so many times, right? The quantity is high, then you make money, right? Just like those people who are buying and selling other things. Like, for instance, our official dollar rate is 10.28 to 15.42. So if somebody can buy within that range and sell at a higher price and then do a lot of those trades, then they can make money. Let's say if they get 50 in, they're rolling out, $2,000, $4,000 in total, like with maybe 4 or 5 transactions or 10 transactions. Then if they sell $4,000, they're going to get 2,000 rupiah, right? Monthly 60,000. So such a person will not need sort of a job if they can continuously make it. Right? So that is what a market like a stock market could do. Right? There's a share prices and stock prices, as well as the movement. Few days ago, 3 days ago, you can see your Uridu's share prices 30. So in the last slide or video, rather, we went through a formula called dividend yield. So as per your investment, what is the return? Oftentimes we have news articles where they say this company gave this much dividend, right? And you can easily see why we can't compare dividend with dividend, because the market prices are not the same, right? The denominator is not the same, so we can't compare numerator, right, of two fractions and decide whether one is large or not without having a look at the denominator, right? So as students, you have to take care of it and make sure that you actually check the price as well and see what the yield is, right, in order to compare. And all of these companies have returns that are well above that of the inflation rate and general risk-free rate. Right? So that means from a financial perspective, it is worth investing. Right? You can also think about setting up own business, and I think COVID have really taught us that there is this need, and we can actually do, and then it will work out if you start early, right? Invest in small quantity, right? People who invest must regularly put money into investment rather than collecting a lot and then just all of a sudden open a huge place, and it doesn't really work that way. Right? Those huge places usually come if there is already an established brand, right? We saw Mango coming recently. So likewise, if there is an established brand, they can do, but they would have taken a while to establish, right? Invest in a niche market, be very focused, try not to do everything, right? Like somebody making a profit from something, rather than that, be focused and also know what is happening to the market, right? After the peak of the pandemic, people started buying from Flora Grand and selling to their on various platforms, and then it's saturated. Now it is saturated. Everybody knows how the prices are, so you cannot make a margin out of it by selling to other people. You know, whether add in some bit of sand or whatever it is. The time where people made 100% profit by selling these things have really gone. Okay. Then pre-order business model versus instant purchases, right? So it's up to a business to decide whether they want pre-order model, right? People order in advance and then pay some deposit to get their money, their product, right? Or instant purchase, right? Are you going to go for mass production? It depends on the nature, right? If it is tailor-made things where you put people's names and other things that they require, then you may have to wait for somebody to pre-order, confirm, and not necessarily pay maybe, but you can make arrangements later. But the options are open. You can have Facebook pages, Instagram, Viber groups, buy from eBay and sell at eBay, and this is all normally for phones and things. This happens. And small outlet eventually, if you can afford, will also be a good idea, right? Then we have other forms of funding. Usually we see in family events and so on, people do crowdfunding, right, to raise money for something. But crowdfunding is also used for business purpose, where you are investing, right, in terms of equity, getting a share of the fund, and then you can get returns from those businesses. Or a crowdfunding may be done where somebody has a great idea to produce something, right? And then you are prepaying for it, and at the end of the day, you get the product for a cheaper price, compatible price, or a product that is very innovative and helpful. Okay. Some of the things like bringing back Reading Rainbow for every child, right? These sorts of movements have helped with crowdfunding to help families who can't afford to get this, Reading Rainbow to their homes. Cooler, for instance, right? If you're going for picnics and so on, you have a blender, you can keep everything, and then you have phone charging facilities, right? And then there are things that you can put inside, tents and so on. All of those in one setting, right? Considered some sort of creative thing. Then those who can't afford Apple iWatch, there is Pebble's smartwatch was usually cheaper, right? They raised about 10 million and was able to successfully deliver this. Right? Okay, thank you. And I think we have a few minutes, right? It's totally unrelated, but I have a few questions for you, right? Some of you can pick up, and then after that we can move on to Kalam's session in another 5 minutes, I guess. I have 3 questions for you, right? This doesn't really require your accounting background, although these are accounting past paper questions. If you use common sense, you can actually answer them, right? Edward's sales ledger, right? There's a business person called Edward who sold goods to Anne, right? 21,500 worth goods. 500 was returned back. So 21,000 is the total, right? Total net sales, and paid 10,000. So it's 21 minus 10, right? 11, and then you can see discount was given as 200, so 10,800, right? A lot of these things, if you think logically, will be fairly easy to deal with, right? And that's why accounting is one of the easiest subjects where you can easily work things out, use common sense. Somebody sold something worth 21,500, of which, for whatever the reason, maybe wrong color or damage, was returned, and he paid back 500. So the person actually owes 21,000, of which they have already cleared 10,000. You have given them a discount of 200. Right? So 10,200 is deducted, giving us 10,800, which is 21 in total. Yeah. This one you got to do, right? You have Google these days, right? Question is markup. Right? There are two terms we use. One is called margin. Margin is profit as a percentage of revenue or sales. Markup is profit as a percentage of cost. What is the margin, right? Anything where it says profit margin, right? Gross margin, net margin, then it is a percentage of revenue, right? Denominator is revenue. But if it is a markup, then cost, what's the cost? Revenue is 100, profit is 20, then cost would have been 80, right? So that's the cost, and then we have gross profit as 20. So 20 divided by 80, 1/4. 1/4 is 25, right? Hey, we are going into business, you have to know normally what is reported is margin, but from your cost, how much profit you make, right, is a percentage of how much it costs you, should also be known, so that you know how much to charge or whether you can actually charge it, right? Generally, if it is an established market, you have a price fixed, right? Usually a commodity like tin, then we have to, right? We have no choice normally. Okay, last question, and then with that, I'll finish my part. Right? Just give me a minute. This is the last question, and the answer is also there. You want subscription income for the year, right? For the year means you're working for the 2018. So everything relevant to 2018 is to be added, and then everything relevant to other years should be subtracted, right? 18, 20. Right? You have in 2017 some areas, meaning that related to 2017 not received. So you have to deduct that if you have received this. But in 2017, if something is paid in advance, that is an amount belonging to 2018. Right? Similarly, use that thing. At the end of 2018, you have something owing for 2018. So you got to add back. See, what we want to work on is these things are worked on what is called accruals basis, meaning that what must be received, what must be paid, right, for that particular year, means your period, how much should be paid or received, right, rather than what must be, so what is paid or received. Okay, so all right, so we will end it here, right, and pass to Kala.
Thank you, Abdullah Zakaria. Can all of you hear my voice?
Yes.
I'll try to share my screen with you as well. So are you able to view my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I would like to thank CNBA for providing this opportunity for BML Islamic to say a few things on Islamic finance and the concept. Now, I also have to make a disclaimer, just like Abdullah Zakaria did, that not necessarily all the views that we express here are that of the institution. Some of the views that I might express here solely belongs to me and from the industry experts as well, and may not be necessarily the views of BML Islam. Okay, so in today's session, what I'm going to talk about is just the basic principles of Islamic finance, or just an understanding of the concept of Islamic finance. not going to be a technical discussion. Rather, it is going to open your mind or open your eyes into what you really have to focus on when discussing on Islamic finance. What the Islamic finance experts have at the back of their mind. So that is the picture that I want to put in as students. That okay, when you as soon as you hear the word Islamic finance or Islamic banking, okay, they're talking about this and they're coming from this perspective. So hopefully that is the idea that I want to put in today. Okay, so in today's session, we are going to talk about I'll try to explain why we need Islamic finance first. So there should be a reason why we need Islamic finance. We have a conventional banking system, which is to some extent fairly efficient, caters to the demands of customers. So why do we need an Islamic finance system if it so caters to the benefits of the customers already established? Then it is going to be inefficient if we have two systems trying to serve the same purpose. So I try to build the case first for Islamic finance. Next, we have, then I'll explain, okay, what are the fundamentals of Islamic finance, and we'll conclude at that. And unfortunately, we don't have that much of a time also to go into that detail of the other axioms or other elements of Islamic finance. Okay, so let us begin. So what is Islamic finance? Now, these days, everyone hears this term. It's a very common term these days. About from, let's say, 10 years back, as soon as you heard the term Islamic finance or Islamic banking, people would have thought, okay, what is it? But now we have an understanding of, yes, there are some Islamic financial institutions in Maldives. For example, we have Maldives Islamic Bank, we have other Amana Takaful, we have other Islamic financial institutions and other private institutions which offer Islamic financial instruments or Islamic finance mechanisms to sell their products as well. Now, what does these Islamic finance contracts or products, how are these contracts or products different from conventional finance products? So to put it simply, it is the application of faith-based norms and derived from the Sharia dealings with financial transactions, trades, and practices. Now, as soon as we hear the term Islamic finance, yes, it's fairly good that we have an understanding. It has some linkages to the religion of Islam. That is well understood. Now, a next question that might come into our head is, okay, so if it is faith-based or if it has a linkage to Islam, does it necessarily mean that it is only for Muslims? Not necessarily. It is not only for Muslims, but it's primarily designed for Muslims who has a consciousness of being able to comply with Sharia. I'll explain that in a while. So it is not necessarily only dedicated to Muslims, but of course it tries to serve the interest of Muslims in particular. And it relies on the texts and prophetic rules and injunctions, fiqh practices, codes developed from Islamic jurisprudence, or what we call as fiqh. So they deal with the lawful and the prohibited, ethical and legal contracts as well. So this is basically what we mean by Islamic finance. Now, okay, just this is the case for now. This is what I will try to spend most of my time in this current sitting. So I'll just explain this purely from Islamic perspective. Now, as Muslims, we do these two activities. For example, we have what we call as the ibadat activity, which focuses on worshipping or praying, and then we have the muamalat, which focuses on transacting or transactions in general. Now, why are these two? I mean, why is it that we have to comply with these rules for these two activities? Very simple. Now, as a Muslim, we are supposed to do everything in accordance to Sharia. Why is it important? Then only we can attain our higher objective. Our higher objective surpasses our life in this world. That is what all Muslims believe, that we have another life that we need to live. Now, in order to make that life actually easier for us, or how do I say it, the most pleasurable for us, we have to abide by the requirements of Sharia. Now, Sharia has required us to abide by the rules that are dedicated for ibadat, that which I have presented here, and the muamalat or transactions in general. Now, we all know as Muslims the 5 pillars of Islam, which is the declaration of faith, and salat, which is the prayer, zakat, fasting, and hajj. So the general rule for all of these is that all acts of worship are prohibited unless proven by a source of Sharia. So what does this mean? This technically means that you cannot do any act of worship unless you can prove it from a source of Sharia. For example, take the case of Salat. There are 5 prescribed Salats for a Muslim. I cannot add or I cannot subtract anything. Now, by common logic, the more we do of a good deed, the more we are going to get in terms of what we call as sawab, right? But it doesn't work like that for ibadah. In ibadah, you cannot add and you cannot subtract. So even if I do want to add for the 5 daily recommended prayers in order to increase my rewards, I cannot do that, right? Because it is an act of worship. Similarly, zakat and similarly fasting. I cannot fast 365 days, even though I want the whole reward, and I cannot go to Hajj on whichever date I want, because these are things which are clearly and explicitly prescribed and understood in the Sharia. So these 5 acts of worship needs to be done in accordance with the Sharia, and you cannot add or subtract from it. So this is the general rule. Now, if somebody comes out and say, look, I want to increase my salat, rather than praying 4 units in, let's say the next prayer is Dhuhr. I want to pray 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 because I have time and I want to increase my reward. Rather than getting the reward, you are going to be doing a sin if you increase or decrease the units that you do in salat for, let's say, dhuhr or afternoon prayers. Okay, so this is how ibadat concept works. So what does this necessarily mean? This necessarily means that you have to learn each and everything when it comes to ibadat. You have to learn how to pray, you have to learn how to give zakat, you have to learn how to fast, you have to learn everything related to these 5 concepts. And a fairly a good deal of, you can say, about all Muslims know how to do these 5 acts of worship in accordance with the Sharia. So that is what we are trained to learn, right? From the very infant stages, we learn all this, and all Muslims, alhamdulillah, have an understanding of all this. Now, on the second concept or the second perspective is transactions. In transactions also, there are rules which are prescribed by the Sharia. So which means when these 2 activities are in conformity to Sharia, then only we'll be able to achieve the higher objective, which is making our life pleasurable in the hereafter. So if you don't stick to the Sharia rules in ibadat, then there's no point. I mean, it will be very difficult for us to attain our objective. Similarly, if you stick to the rules of ibadat and neglect the rules of muamalat or transactions, again, it will be very difficult to attain our objective. So Islamic finance or Islamic banking or any of these Islamic financial institutions tended to cater to those requirements which are prescribed in muamalat in Sharia. That is basically what Islamic finance is all about. Now, Islamic finance is trying to serve the interest of Muslims by giving them conformity that the transactions that we do with the customer from an Islamic financial institution is in line with the requirements of Sharia, just like how we know that the transactions, the ibadat, salat, zakat, fasting, and hajj are in line with the requirements of Sharia. So this is generally what an Islamic financial institution assures the customer of. And there are two types of transactions, basically unilateral and bilateral. So the general rule is very simple. The general rule is now obviously in reverse to what the general rule was for worshipping or praying. So here the general rule is all transactions are proven. Yes, all transactions are permissible unless proven prohibited by sources of Sharia. So this becomes very simple now. You can do whatever you want unless it is explicitly confirmed from the sources of Sharia that it is a prohibited transaction. Now, just to go through, what are the sources of Sharia? Basically, there are two primary sources of Sharia, which we say, which our Muslims believe is the Quranic text and the authentic teachings of the Prophet. So these are the primary sources. Then the other secondary sources are a derivative of all these primary sources. So basically, then we have ijtihad, qiyas, and ijma, which are derivatives of these primary sources. So basically, transactions or what is prohibited, explicitly prohibited in transactions, are derived from the Quran and Sunnah. So in Sharia, sorry, in Ibadat, we have to learn each and everything. We have to learn how to pray, how to give zakat, how to fast, and how to perform Hajj. But when it comes to transactions, what do we have to learn? We have to only learn what are the prohibited activities, and the rest is permissible. So this is where Muslims find it difficult to understand in transactions. As I said previously, we are well versed with the acts of ibadat, but when it comes to muamalat, there's going back and forth between, oh, is this permissible? Is this explicitly said in the Sharia that this is not permissible or something like that? So understanding what needs to be prohibited or understanding what are the prohibitions in transactions is enough to make those transactions Sharia compliant. So in a nutshell, we are going to see what are the prohibited elements in a transaction. Okay. So this is basically in general, what are the prohibited elements in a transaction. So if you have a good understanding, I mean, we should have a good understanding of this, right? So we should have a good understanding of what riba is. We should have a good understanding of what this Arabic term is called gharar, or uncertainty, ambiguity, or what deception is. And we should have a good understanding of what miser or gambling is. And we should have a good understanding of what prohibited goods and services are. So when you're conducting a transaction, all that you have to look out for is whether you have any of these four elements. This is very basic. If you are able to prove that none of these elements exist in a transaction, by the previous law that we discussed, all acts of transactions are permissible unless you have anything which is prohibited by Sharia. So if you're able to prove any of these elements are not there in your transactions, that means your transaction is fairly valid, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a transaction that somebody else might have done at the time of the Prophet. It could be something new. It could be a new transaction, and this new transaction, if you're able to prove that doesn't involve any riba or gharar or maisir or prohibited goods and services, then it becomes fairly easy to establish. So the prohibitions when it comes to transactions are very minimal compared to the bulk of the things which are allowed in Islam, right? So that's why it becomes to somewhat problematic to establish what is permissible or what is impermissible when it comes to transactions. That is why that early Muslim scholars, in my opinion, might have not written extensively on the transactions, because the bulk of it is considered to be permissible. Okay. Now, I just glance through to try to explain what each of these concepts are. For example, take the case of riba. Now, in Maldivian context, or even you can take the Muslim context, there's a difficulty in understanding what constitutes to riba. Some people simply equate riba to usury, and others exclude interest. right? So these are some of the concepts, but all Muslim scholars and all Muslims agree that riba is not permissible. So we'll just leave the discussion there. So to simply put, riba in a classical Islamic terminology relates to the excess that you get, which is predetermined, conditional, and renders a benefit to the customer. Now, for example, somebody loans me 100 rupiah, right? And I promised to pay him back, let's say, additional 50 rupiah with the with the 100 rupiah that he gave me back, and that was the reason why he lent me that 100 rupiah. So which means these three categories needs to be fulfilled for it to be called riba. It should be predetermined, so which means the excess 50 has been predetermined, and it needs to be conditional. So now I'm saying the condition for giving that loan was that I repay 50 rupiah. So it was conditional and renders a benefit to the lender. So this 50 rupiah should render a benefit to the loan to the lender also. Now, what are the circumstances in which a lender might not get a benefit? Now, let's say somebody comes and tells me, look, I need 100 rupiah. I said, okay, fine, I'm going to give you 100 rupiah, but I don't have any cash with me. Let's say I operate a Maldives Islamic Bank's account. To withdraw 100 rupiah, they charge 1 rupiah as a transaction fee from the ATM. So this is a cost to me. Now, when I give the 100 rupiah to this person, I tell him, look, you have to pay me 101 rupiah back, because in order to give you that 100 rupiah, I had to take this additional cost. Now, even when he repays that 101 rupiah to me, I still don't get a benefit. So this is not considered as riba. So please, not all additional amounts with respect to the principal amount is categorized as riba. These three conditions need to be fulfilled, which is predetermination, and the conditional lending, and which renders a benefit to the lender. So once these three conditions are fulfilled in the contract, then it results in riba. For example, let's say somebody gives money, right? And this person he did not make it a condition that he should repay additionally anything more. He just gave it as a loan to be repaid back later. But the person who borrowed the money thought, okay, when I repay it back, I'm going to pay additional 500 rupiah or additional 1000 rupiah, because he helped me at the time of my dire need. So this person, without any predetermination or without any condition, repays an additional amount which might render a benefit to the borrower, right? In this circumstance also, it is not termed as riba, right? And there are explicit sources from explicit evidences from the sources of Sharia which implies this. Okay, so this is the concept of riba in a nutshell. And riba is considered as one of the gravest sins in Islam. So which means refraining from that is it's very important if we want to attain our common objective. Now, if you take any readings on Islamic finance or any discussions on Islamic finance, the most debated or the most explained concept will be the concept of riba, or usury, right? Because it is one of the most misunderstood concepts when it comes to uh, transactions within Muslim communities. And the same can be observed when it comes to Maldivian economy as well. Usually people would say that no, riba is not equal to interest, or interest is something different, and it has nothing to do with discounting. Riba is simply usury, and it results when there's an excessive charge or something like that. So we are not going to go into the details of that, but to simply put, we are going to say that riba is not well understood within the Muslim community as to what constitutes riba. But as students just have this basic understanding that any amount which is above the principal amount which is lent, and under which is predetermined, conditional, and renders a benefit will constitute as riba. Okay. Now the next concept, so that is the first prohibition. So which means first you have to make sure that your transaction does not involve any element which relates to the concept of riba. Next is prohibited goods and service. Muslims have a good understand. I would say even in Maldivian context also, Muslims have a good understanding of prohibited goods and services. So liquor, pork, or what you call as certain types of entertainments, and these type of activities, Muslims have a good understanding. So I cannot sell liquor and earn a profit, or I cannot sell what you call pork meat to earn a living. So transacting in any of these is considered Sharia, not permitted by Sharia. So that is the second aspect that you have to look into, whether you are not trading or whether your transaction does not involve any of the prohibited goods and services. So that is the second thing that you have to see. Now the third thing is the concept of gambling. Now a lot of people, when we say gambling, it feels like it is something which is really straightforward. Some people might think, okay, we know what gambling is. You play with cards and you put money on the table. But the concept is not only limited to playing of cards or different types of game. The concept is stretched further to include certain types of services like insurance company businesses as well, right? So I'm not going to, once again, this is not the time and place to go into the details of how gambling or miser is involved in certain type of conventional businesses. But to put it short, certain type of conventional businesses have the concept of gambling already embedded in it, and that's why scholars have determined that dealing with these type of businesses might result in Sharia non-compliance. Okay, and the next thing. So now the three things: whether it is whether riba exists, whether you're dealing with prohibited goods and services, or whether you are dealing with and whether your transaction involves a gambling element. So these three things needs to be looked out for. And the next thing is what we call as gharar or uncertainty, ambiguity, or deception. Now you have to make sure that your transaction at no point involves uncertainty, ambiguity. Now uncertainty or ambiguity, gharar is loosely translated as uncertainty or ambiguity, but it encompasses a far huge meaning that uncertainty, ambiguity, and deception, right? So when we sell something, or sometimes what we call as insider information is also regarded as gharar, and undue advantage to one party is also considered as gharar, because anything which might result in a transaction to result in conflicts later on can be regarded as gharar. For example, I'm selling something, let's say for 100 rupiah, but I don't disclose what I'm selling. I'm simply saying I'm going to sell uh, product X for 100 rupiah, and somebody agrees to buy product X for 100 rupiah. Now, the person who bought it in his mind might think that, okay, for 100 rupiah, I would be expecting something which is worth 100 rupiah. But let's say at the end, I just give him a piece of paper and say, look, this is what I was selling for 100 rupiah. What would this do later on? This would result in conflict. Now, these type of transactions are not permissible in Islam. So any significant matter which needs to be disclosed in a transaction, and that significant matter or that significant aspect not being disclosed at the time of contracting, which may result in a conflict later on, can be termed as what we call as gharar, uncertainty, or ambiguity, right? So if you can prove that your transactions does not involve any of this, riba, prohibited goods and services, maisir, or gharar, then you can do whatever you want within these boundaries, right? So this is what we call as the basic parameters in Islamic finance. So what does an Islamic finance institution do? Now, an Islamic financial institution not necessarily, you might not observe. Now, this is something which a lot of people perceive differently, right? So when they come to an Islamic bank or when they come to an Islamic financial institution, they think the whole process is going to be a different experience for them, and that it is going to be a 180-degree turn for them when they come to an Islamic bank or an Islamic financial institution. But much to their surprise, they are not going to find, uh, how do I put it, much of a difference in any of these transactions from their perspective. I'll give you an example. Now, let's say you go to an conventional bank to buy a motorcycle, right? Now, when you go to a conventional bank to buy a motorcycle, they might give, let's say the cost of the motorcycle is 50,000 rupiah, and they might give you 50,000 rupiah. Now, you take the 50,000 rupiah, you go to a motorcycle dealer shop, you buy your motorcycle. So at the end of the day, what happens is you get your motorcycle and you owe the bank money. So let's say you pay 1,000 rupiah every month until the principal plus interest portion is paid to the bank. So what is the result for you? The result for you is very simple, that you got your motorcycle and that you pay the money to the bank. Now, when you come to an Islamic bank, the same thing happens. At the end of the day, you get your motorcycle and you owe the bank and you pay the money to the bank. Now, a customer might think, okay, so what is fundamentally different in this? That I don't see any difference in this. At the end of the day, I owe the bank. At the end of the day, I get my motorcycle. So in Sharia, now this is why we find it difficult to explain Islamic finance to some of the non-Muslims, because in order to understand Islamic finance, there should be understanding, in the sense means how Sharia works. In order to understand how Sharia works, there should be an understanding of how the concepts in Sharia itself in Islam. For example, take the concept of halal food, right? So this is a common example usually cited by some of the Islamic finance scholars as well. I think it's fairly valid. Now, when you take the concept of halal food, now if any of you go to any of the restaurants, and if food is being offered to you, and you are, let's say there are similar kinds of food being offered to you, but there's no indication whether it is halal or not, and if you're asked to choose from them, you would first consider the price options, whether it is tasty or somewhat, right? Now, let's say after evaluating these concepts, somebody says that, okay, this food is not halal, only this food is halal. Now, even though you have considered that option to be less, in terms of price it is less, in terms of taste it is better, but still you cannot choose it, because you understand from a Sharia perspective that the process of preparing that food is not Sharia compliant, hence the term what we call as Sharia compliant, right? So we know that if it is something made by, let's say, chicken, that the chicken was not properly slaughtered according to the rules of Sharia. That's why that even though it is tastier and even though it is cheaper, Muslims cannot consume it. Similarly, it is not the end result, right? So it is not the end result that we are talking about. The end result is, let's say, a chicken burger. And the end result of a halal chicken burger is also the same. The price also might be the same. But you cannot choose between, you don't, as a Muslim, we don't have the option of going back and forth between simply saying that, look, both burgers taste the same, both burgers are priced equally, so I don't see any difference. I'm going to just stick to whichever I want because I'm indifferent. So there's no indifference which you can, there's no indifference claim which you can make from this perspective now, because as Muslims we understand that now we cannot be indifferent when you put the halal stamp on one burger. Now what has changed? The price haven't changed even though you put halal, and the taste would, and the taste also will not change even if you put halal. And if we don't put halal on any of these, by observation or by tasting also, you cannot determine how one is Sharia compliant. That is what Islamic finance institutions also do. Islamic financial institutions not necessarily change the end result. The end result, as I just said before, might be that you want a motorcycle. An Islamic financial institution makes sure that you get your motorcycle by observing the tenets of Sharia with respect to the transaction that you just perform. It might involve a buying and selling, it might involve any other type of contract, but an Islamic financial institution, just like how these certification authorities put halal on certain food stuff, Islamic financial institutions also assures the customer, look, this transaction is Sharia compliant, and that when you get a product or when we cater to your requirements or financial requirements from this bank, we make sure that the requirements are satisfied in accordance to the Sharia. So basically, all Islamic financial institutions observe that there is no riba, there is no prohibited goods and services in those transactions, and there's no gambling aspect, and there's no uncertainty or gharar involved in those transactions. So that is basically the concept of Islamic finance. Now, next, I will touch on a small aspect which is not covered in this, which is risk, right? Now, uncertainty, ambiguity is not the same as risk. Now, equally important with these prohibitions is the concept of risk. Now, in order to legitimize profit, there should be an element of risk in every transaction. You cannot legitimize profit from a Sharia perspective without taking a risk. So, in all transactions from an Islamic financial institution, no matter how small, there will be a risk element involved in all transactions to the bank. It is up to the bank to mitigate that risk. That is a different concept. Just like how a normal person would mitigate risk in accordance to Sharia, an Islamic bank uh, also has the right to mitigate those types of risks in accordance to Sharia. For example, in trade-based transactions, the bank buys and sells you the motorcycle. So during this process, bank undertakes a portion of risk. Now, this risk might be small. This risk, the taking of the risk might, the duration of the risk which the bank holds on to might be small also. But regardless of the fact that whether it is small or whether the time frame of taking the risk is small or not, the bank will take a risk in any of the transactions which legitimizes profit, right? So that is basically the understanding, or what we call as the basics of Islamic finance. Now, just a little bit on the on the other concepts or other economic systems which are there out there. For example, we have the most talked about capitalism and socialism or communism in general, right? There is also what we call as an Islamic economic system, right? An Islamic economic system, the tenets or the axioms of the Islamic economic system has been enshrined and has been there from the very beginning, from the time of the Prophet as well. What has lacked from from the Muslim community is that we haven't taken those rules which are there in the books, of primary Sharia books, and actually translated them into textbook which can be taught in schools. Right now, I don't think that even in the mold, even in mold is at the secondary level or even in the tertiary level, there is still a discussion of Islamic finance as a subject, even though the world, it has been around for around 30 years, and it is now not regarded as one of, now it is regarded as one of the most, not one of the most, but as an alternative to conventional finance, right? Even the conventional financial experts have now stated that, look, we have something called Islamic finance, which is different to conventional finance and which is an alternative to conventional finance. I'll just give you a statistic which is very important to understand that there is a difference between conventional finance and Islamic finance. Now, Malaysia is regarded as one of the important hubs of Islamic finance, and around 60%, I'm talking about in Malaysia, right? Around 60% of the Islamic banking customers in Malaysia are non-Muslim. So non-Muslims understand now, from a Muslim perspective, we understand that, okay, we take the example of halal burger and we say that, look, even though we don't observe any difference between these two, we understand the concept of halal and haram. But from a non-Muslim's perspective, he or she needs to understand the material difference in order to opt for Islamic finance. I'm saying there is a material difference also in Islamic finance, which might not be that evident when it comes to transactions, but these statistics clearly prove that non-Muslims even understand the concept of Islamic finance. So 60%, right? 60% of the Islamic banking customers being non-Muslims actually prove that they understand the concept that it is what we call as ethical, and some people don't like the term Islamic finance and they want to coin it into ethical finance or something like that, right? So they understand the concept of being an ethical investment opportunity for them as well, right? So this is also somewhat important when it comes to the discussion or the basics of Islamic finance. Now, just to stretch it a little bit further, right? There are other concepts which Islamic banks or Islamic financial institutions or the proponents of Islamic finance experts always talk about, which is called the purpose of Sharia, right? Now, here we have the four different prohibitions. Just to stretch it a bit further, we can talk about the purpose of Sharia. The purpose of Sharia requires the protection of five essential elements, right? It's the first thing is the protection of the religion, then you have the protection of your self, then you have the protection of your mind, then you have the protection of wealth, then you have the protection of your what you call as progeny, right? Or in Dividend we say that first call, right? So even Islamic finance, because it is a component of Sharia, will revolve around the protection of these five essential elements. Since we are trying to compete with conventional banks or conventional financial institutions at this time, to some extent it might be neglected in some cases, but nevertheless, it is also something to, it is something that is going to be focused on throughout the development of Islamic finance or Islamic banking institutions as well, right? So yes, so basically those are the things that in a nutshell that I wanted to discuss as the basic fundamentals of Islamic finance in general. Yes, if there are any questions, I think we have a question session later on, which we will attend. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kalam. Now we can open for question and Q&A session to students. Abdul? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. We will leave the session to you both.
Yes, the floor is open, and if you have any questions, clarifications, or even comments, please let us know.
Students, are you here with us? Aji benu fulveto eveceche.
They can also send questions through the chat
Yeah.
as
Yes,
well.
we have to.
So,
No.
yeah, Ayub is saying like, yeah, they can hear. So they can hear clearly. So if you have a question, you could type as well.
إذا كنت سؤال الندة أزي أزي بين فلويتو إبس إجفاء كلهم.
And there is a question from a student. What is CMD's role in the economy? Yeah, very good question. See, the financial market, we have banking, sector, and then capital market. Generally, the purpose of capital market is, for instance, in a country like Maldives, we have excess demand for banking products, right? There's so many people who want loans and funding for things, but capital market can cater for some of those needs, and also additionally bring in benefits, right? When people become overall richer, better off, banking industry also benefits as a result of capital market being in existence. So the market is where savers and those who have financial needs are connected, right? So for instance, if you think about a private company that may not be able to bid for a large project and raise funds, if they sell shares to public, right, or other institutional investors, they may be able to raise lots of money, right? The most recent IPOs have raised in excess of 400 million rupiah from our market, right? So if somebody can have 400 million rupiah in their company as a listed company, then they can use it for huge projects and take advantage of mass production, right? And oftentimes they will have lots of persons employed, and in terms of income they earn, that is also going to contribute to the economy. So that is actually the role, right? Bringing together those who have funds and those who need funds. And oftentimes, although it is much riskier than banking, right, you can get a good return for your investment. Thereby you can diversify, right? You have to have something in the bank. If you want to do business and make more money by investing in stock market, then you can make use of it. Additionally, now private market placement or a framework has been developed where smaller companies can also make use of capital market to earn, right? To earn and raise finance, right? Earn in the sense they can invest in shares, bonds, and sukuk, as well as they can also raise finance, right, for their projects, right? So the contribution will actually depend on how developed the market is. Currently, right, 1 year ago, if you like, the market's volume of trade has reached about 1 billion USD. So market cap overall is 15 billion. So that is huge, but not as huge as comparatively not as huge as developed world, right? We have a long way to go, but that is the kind of contribution the market can give to the economy. Yeah, any other questions? As you know, Kalam has very clearly laid out the concepts, and still if you have any comments or questions regarding those concepts, please feel free to ask. Okay, what CMDA does is really, there are various things. First, we are the regulator of listed companies. That means, we will get their quarterly reports, annual reports, as well as whether they are following best practices of governance. Those are the things we check. We also supervise Maldives retirement pension scheme. Yeah. Everyone who is working in the Maldives is contributing, right? Every Maldivian is contributing and ensuring that it is invested in a way that will protect the rights of those who are contributing, which means every citizen effectively, right? let me just say, some services provided. We also supervise market intermediaries. We license market participants like brokers, investment advisors, Sharia advisors, and so on, right, for the market. And would you like to add anything? Itu investing at Columbia mute.
Okay. Yeah, we do conduct these sessions, right? Awareness sessions, financial literacy, and other Islamic finance, corporate governance, all those. In addition to that, some other professional trainings also we conduct for market participants.
Yeah, can I add something to that with your permission?
Okay, yes.
Yeah, I think from a Sharia perspective, one of the important functions which CMDA provides is a whitelisting of shares, right? So CMDA also has a Sharia board, which, for example, if a public company wants to issue shares to the public, and if they need to, just like putting a halal stamp on the shares, this is one thing which CMDA actually can do. So they will list the shares as Sharia compliant. For example, in Maldives, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Amanat Takaful is the only whitelisted company in Maldives which certification has been given by Maldives Islamic Bank and Amanat Takaful, if I can recall, is the only two shares which have been endorsed by CMDA to be Sharia compliant. So this is also one of the important functions which CMDA currently provides.
Also, if any company wants to issue a sukuk to public, the Sharia Advisory Council of CMDA will approve and will approve, and then it will be endorsed by CMDA board. Any more questions?
Okay, generally we're saying the prices of things are rising. So the cost of living, or things that are driven by demand and supply. So I mean, as an organization, we cannot really have that kind of control. So it's at a policy level, certain measures will be taken by central bank and finance ministry and policy makers in order to see these things are maintained. And it has become even worse of during pandemic, because as demand decreases, the people who sell will also want to meet their revenue targets and so on. So that's a very common thing. But once tourism picks up, hopefully we will see some decline in that, or at least some containment. But as you know, we have not had what is called hyperinflation, right? Very high rates of increase in prices, right? Like what was seen in Zimbabwe or some of these other unstable places. So our year-on-year increase in prices have been fairly stable, has not gone beyond 3-4% in any of the past years, right? If you look at the worst we had was around 2007-8 because of another financial crisis. So we have to wait and see what will happen after this 2020. Right? But hopefully within next few years it is going to come down a bit. There was a slight dip from 2018 to 19, right? But unfortunately now we are in this situation, and it is likely to rise as debt level increases, right? Individually, people can do certain things, right? By holding some of the expenses and also finding ways and means to make money, right? So that economic activity can be carried out in a way that will have some lower pressure for those things, right? And there are certain policy changes or decisions that are taken, like those that are shipping and the dock of the Kuladhafashi and so on. So those sorts of things will bring down prices. A lot of people are also growing their own vegetables and so on. So these things additionally will lower prices. So it is ultimately everybody's contribution that will determine whether prices will go down or up. Okay.
Any more questions? Kalam benum fulveto eveseche ed colon students bunelam.
Yeah, nothing much in general, but if there are any other questions, or if you have any questions which you might be interested to ask further, you can always contact Bank of Maldives Islamic on regarding Islamic finance as well, where we'll be able to clarify on those issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Abdul, before we conclude the session, would you like?
Thank you, Aziz, for providing this opportunity for us to share knowledge with students, and we hope those students who attended will pass the knowledge to others, and also especially in the area of Islamic finance, because it's fairly new, right? Even though we call ourselves Muslims, unfortunate thing is that very little is known for many of us. So make use of that opportunity Kalam has offered, and get guidance, right? Learn and also teach others, help others in this process, right?
Yeah. Azi, would you like to add anything? Mihai sabungalun menge session nimu makangai hurihaku dines barabod syukur dannawan tibe hurihaku din mi warakanula han tibikaman ummid koran den CMD ke Facebook page hama mi kudinna fahum wes balalewen ema kalam adi abdus warabod syukur dannawan alon menge team azma ajwad hama mi big terega alun menga di kuria program tange buhuri ehem wi malon men mi education mi hisabun nimmala fawaki wela nan uriha reference wara bajweri duwa hakan eden wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.